as Lee mentioned, the presentation tonight is part of the Better Speaker series, and the focus is impromptu speaking. And impromptu speaking is something which goes way beyond Toastmasters meetings. And after all, what are we in Toastmasters for? We're wanting to improve our communication skills in the wide world. And impromptu speaking is much, much more than responding to a table topic, because in everyday life, we're using it all the time. It could be something very important, like a job interview. You don't know what questions you'll be asked. It could be a phone call at home. It could be a question from somebody at home. So it's something which is really fundamental to what we do every day. And the good thing about Toastmasters is that it's helping you to enhance your skills in this type of activity. So, when giving an impromptu talk, what I'll talk about is a 5-step, that wasn't an R by the way, I was going to say ARE. This is something you need to think about when you're giving an impromptu talk. There's a 5-step formula for impromptu speaking, so I'll run through those steps, and then some strategies for applying that formula, and then just 3 wrap-up recommendations. As Stephen said earlier on in the night, listening is one of the most important skills in Toastmasters. And it's absolutely critical when you're in an impromptu speaking situation. How many times have you been in a Toastmasters meeting and you're thinking about preparation for the next speech, or what's what somebody said 5 minutes ago, as the Toastmaster, the table topics master is up the front, introducing the next topic, and your mind is elsewhere, and all of a sudden you hear your name called. You weren't listening. You need to be listening. In a more important situation, like the job interview I mentioned earlier, very important meeting. You might have 3 people, 3 interviewers, 2 or 3, doesn't matter. You might be 5 minutes into the interview, and all of a sudden something triggers a thought in your head. Gas bill that came last night. I didn't pay it. I think it was one of the red ones. Did it say something about disconnection? And all of a sudden you're back in the meeting, and the person's saying, so that's the scenario. What would you do in those circumstances? Very difficult. Have you been in that sort of situation? Have you found yourself in that situation? So we're here learning how to listen and be prepared for that question that you have to respond to in an impromptu way. Or that one. Now, you're given the question, or you're asked to comment on something, you've now got the floor or the chair, whatever it is. You've got the opportunity not to jump in and go 100 miles an hour and try to get this out of the way. You can just take hold, just stop for a moment and pause. And try not to fill that pause. We definitely don't want ums and ahs and, you know, I was thinking about that, da-di-da-di-da. You can have silence. And that can enhance the presentation. It can add a dramatic effect to the presentation as people are drawn in, wondering what are you going to say, how are you going to start this. So make the most of the pauses. Don't worry about them. Use them. Thirdly, you can confirm the question back, or the topic that you've been asked to speak about. How often have you, in table topics, done that very thing as you come up to the front, shaking hands with the table topics master? The mind's going around and around and you're trying to think what to say. You buy yourself a few seconds by repeating the question. And then the mind kicks away a little bit further and you might have rushed on to something that gets you going for the next minute and a half. So it's very helpful to help you avoid wasting time later, because if you confirm the question back to the person who's asked it, it can help bring you on track. You might have misunderstood the question, so they can clarify it for you and you're both on track. And it's brought you some time, as I say. Then you give the impromptu presentation or their response, whatever it might be. And in doing this, structure is very important. We'll talk about that a little bit further in the strategies that you can adopt. But make sure that you grab that opportunity. It is your floor. That's your time in the sun when you're telling the audience or the single person or 3 or 4 people, whatever it might be, what you want to say. So again, remember, you've got the floor, just make the most of it. And the final item is to wrap it up, conclude, and let people know that you are concluding, because again, it's about structure. You don't want to be meandering off and people wondering, well, is that it? Do you have any more to say? Make sure that they know you've finished. Try to smile if it's appropriate. Bit of eye contact. Look that person in the eye. Let them understand you're finished now. Back to you. You've done your bit. So that's the basic formula. Very familiar. Does that seem familiar to you in what we do here, in what we do in everyday life? It's very straightforward, but it's important to keep it in mind because so many people can lose their way and go round and round in circles. Okay. So, some strategies, a few strategies. You might want to express an opinion. I don't have any opinions, as people know from hearing before. Or maybe I do on a few things. But be very firm if you can grab the opportunity to voice your opinion and try to make it very, very clear what you are saying and how you want to say it. You can also address cause and effect. And I think these strategies are all about compartmentalising the response in a way, because it helps people remember. If you can break it down, which is really the next point, but each of these is trying to break it down in a certain way. So you might have an opinion about the homelessness situation. You might believe that it's caused by events a long time prior. This poor person in the street may have came from an underprivileged background. The person's parents may have been poor, the person wasn't educated properly, they didn't receive enough funding for health, and all those sorts of things. And they struggled through life to the point they couldn't work, and they ended up on the street. So there's some cause there to what we're seeing now, and what's the future consequences of that? They might have children already, those children might be in poverty, etc., etc. So you can build some structure there to not just look at the current situation, but the cause of that and the future consequences. Okay, break the topic into components, which is largely what we're saying with all of these, but try to break it down and focus bit by bit and keep it very, very brief. That way you don't need to say a lot on any particular point, but you can work through those, and again, it might help the people remember the particular point which you want to make. Similarly, discussing past, present and future. So the example I just gave about cause and effect could be another one of those. You can talk about this person on the street who 20 years ago was a child, and something you might want to do in talking about past, present, future is to use the floor, and typically you might start on one side of the floor and you might talk about 20 years ago this person, and here we have the present day and they're on the street. So where is this going to lead in the next 20 years? And just come across, you've got the floor, it's the whole floor, you're entitled to use it. And that sort of movement for a purpose, you're not meandering, you're not going around the floor, is very effective. One problem somebody might have if they're not sure about a structure and these types of strategies, their speech might resemble a walk in the park. If you can imagine them, they might be just rolling along with their talk and go around in a circle or two and repeat things and all that type of thing. We want to avoid that. We want to have that sort of structure if we use the timeline and come across like that. So, three very, very important points. be confident in what you're doing. It can embarrass you sometimes to be up in front of people, but try not to feel embarrassed, because the people are expecting to hear from you. They want to hear what you have to say. If it's table topics, you've been called up, the table topics master's decided you're the person, he or she wants to speak on this particular topic, you're there for a reason. So just act in a way that you are supposed to be there and make the most of it. And be brief. If you can say something in a minute and a half, it's in the outside world, we know it is in table topics, don't take 5 minutes to say it. Because the last thing you want is people starting to look at their watch or look around and yawn, etc., etc. You know you've lost them then, and if your impact is gone. Better to be cutting it short and bang, hand it back to them. You've wrapped up, you've made your point. And it encourages discussion as well. And it's something to think about with the listening point here. We've been given the topic. Be brief, but cut to the chase. And if you've listened properly to what the person has asked you, in your response, you can feed something back to them, something they said, or you can put your talk into the context of what they've said, which encourages them to then respond, because they're more knowledgeable and they've engaged with your topic more than they would have otherwise. And be sincere. If you don't believe in what you're saying, just don't bother talking about that topic. And it can be difficult in a table topic situation. But remember, table topics is just training for the wider world. It's practice. It's a skill that we're developing to respond to an impromptu situation in the wider world. So you might be given a topic which is not something you really want to talk about. I know this sounds crazy, but you might be asked to talk about going back to being a 12-year-old and give yourself some advice. And you might talk about Johann Sebastian Bach, for example. I know it's hard to imagine, but that's the sort of thing that you by doing that, you are talking about a topic that means a lot to you. And your presentation might be a lot more meaningful, and the people in the audience might have learned a lot more from it because you did steer it that way. Gets back again, you've got the floor, you can do what you want with it. So make the most of that opportunity and try to bring it back. And a very important point, try not to be prosaic. I wouldn't be prosaic if I could help it. I would try to be more poetic and enhance your speech a little bit that way. We don't want to be too boring. So they're the points about impromptu speaking. As I said, the opportunities come up every single day, almost every minute of every day, while we're awake at least, maybe in your dreams as well. You can be responding to an impromptu question repeatedly as well. But it's a great skill to have, and people, even if it's in a meeting, you could be in a business meeting across a table for people, getting asked questions, topics are coming up, could be a 2-hour meeting, and if you've developed these skills, you can develop them yourself mentally every day. You can be in a situation and think, yes, I've listened, I've heard, and listening is a great skill, so just focus on that. I've listened, I understand that situation, just maybe play around with it a little bit. Which strategy would you use? Would you use the timeline? Would you use a cause and effect and that type of thing? And then when it's the real deal and the question is,